Do you want to learn how to eliminate flakiness from your tests? If so, stick around. In this video, we're going to learn how to use snapshot testing using Jest. This video is part of a video series on Jest. Hi, my name is Marco Cruz and I'm the founder of automateNow. You can learn more about us by going to automatenow.io. So in this video, we're talking about snapshot testing in Jest. Let's have a look at what snapshot testing is, shall we? Okay, so what is snapshot testing? Snapshot testing in Jest is a powerful testing technique that allows us to capture a render output. And this could be from, for example, a function, a component, or a serializable value. We can then save this as a snapshot file. This snapshot serves as a reference point for future test runs to detect unexpected changes. We're going to be looking at concrete examples of this, but for now, let's move on and see how this all works together. When you run a snapshot test for the first time, Jest creates a snapshot file containing the serialized output. The next time that you run your test, Jest is going to compare the output against the stored snapshot. Okay, so this is where the testing comes into play. Okay, we're going to have already a point of reference, which is that first test run is going to create that point of reference. And then on future test runs, we're going to be comparing the output from our test against the baseline or the point of reference that we had. Then we have here change detection. So if the output happens to differ from the snapshot, then the test is going to fail. All right, and we're going to need to investigate why that fails. Is it a test-related failure or is it the application that has changed? So in that case, Jest is going to show us the differences so that we can take the appropriate action. And lastly, we have here updating the snapshots. So Jest allows us to update the snapshot when the changes are intentional. And we can use this flag right here called updateSnapshot, or you can use the -u flag. Do you know what the difference is between snapshot testing and UI validation or UI regression testing? So you may be asking yourself, is snapshot testing the same as visual regression testing? The answer is no. So snapshot testing and visual regression testing are two distinct ways of testing UIs, and they serve different purposes. In visual regression testing, we are taking a screenshot of a web page and comparing the results pixel by pixel. On the other hand, with snapshot testing, values are serialized, stored in text files, and compared using a diff algorithm. Now let's go to the code so that we can take a look at some concrete examples. So here I have this class called �UI_component.js, and this class represents a hypothetical UI component. Let's have a look at what this class is all about. So here we have this method here that's called renderUserCard. All right, so what this does is really, it renders a hypothetical user card, and it requires that we have a user object. Okay, this is basically our user data, and this is going to return a component representation of that data. All right, if we take a look at here, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have this card, and we're going to have the class name as user card. Then we're going to have various children here. We have here, for example, a header with this class name. And we have here, for example, the type of heading that we're using and the type of element that we're creating here, with different class names, etc., etc. So basically, this is going to create a representation of that object that is being passed into this method. Next, we're going to be using snapshot testing to test this method here. So let's go ahead and create a new test over here. So I'm going to right click on this test folder here, and I'm going to say new file. And then I'm just going to call this one UI component.test.js. Let's go ahead and create a constant here that is going to represent that UI component. So I'm going to call this one UI component, and then it's going to be equal to require, and then we're going to say where that component is located in our file system. So we're going to say src and select UI component. All right, so that's all we need there. Next, let's go ahead and add a describe function here so that we can start adding some tests. So we're going to say test, and the description we're going to give this test is that it should match user card snapshot. Now we need to create the user object. let's go back over here to our UI component and have a look at what we need to pass. So basically, we need to have a username. We also need a user role, and we need a user email and a user join date. So let's go ahead and create that object that has those details so that we can pass it to this method. So let's go ahead and create that object here. We're going to call it user is equal to, and then we're going to say here the name of the user. Let's give our user a fun name such as bug squasher. Then we're going to give it an email here, and we're going to say that is bug@automateNow.io. Then we're going to give it a role, and the role is going to be a tester. Lastly, we're going to give it a join date, and I'm just going to say here 2026-01-01. Now that we have our user, let's go ahead and pass it to our method in the UI component. So here we're going to say const component is equal to UI component dot render user card, and then we're going to give it our user here. And now we're ready to make our assertion. So let's go ahead and do that here. We're going to say expect, and then we're going to say component, and we're going to be using a new matcher here, which is called toMatchSnapshot. And this is the matcher that Jest uses to compare snapshots. So let's do a quick walkthrough of what we just did here. And what we've done with this method here is basically to create this user object, which has various properties. Okay, in this case, we have a name, an email, a role, and a join date. The reason why we have these properties here is because we're going to be testing this UI component, right? In particular, we have this method here called render user card, and this method requires that we have those different properties. For example, here the username, the role, right, and in the email, the join date, etc. Right? So that's what we have created this object here. And then we're calling that component there. We're saying UI component that render user card, and we're passing it this user data right here. And what happens here is that this render user card method is going to receive this user object as input, and it is going to return a structured object, which represents an HTML structure for displaying that user card. We then have this assertion here that is going to do the snapshot validation. So basically, the first time that we run this test, it is going to create a snapshot for this particular object. And we're going to be saving that into a file. And that's going to be used as a point of reference. The second time or the following times that we run this test, it's always going to be referring to the snapshot that it has saved on file. And if anything changes or anything is different, then it's going to fail the test. And that's how it all works. We have a point of reference, which we save to a file. And anytime our test runs, it's always going to be comparing the test output against the reference that we have on file. So let's go ahead and save everything here. And we're going to execute this test to see how the snapshot is going to be created. Okay, so I went ahead and saved everything. Now let's go ahead and bring up a terminal here. And we're going to be executing this test here. If you've been following along, you know that we created here a special script here. We call it test, and this is going to run our Jest tests. So here I'm just going to say npm and then call it test. But I also want to ensure that I only run this test right here. I don't want to run all of my tests that I have here. So let me go ahead and say dash dash, and then I'm going to pass in the name of the file. So I'm going to say UI component .test.js. Okay, so this is going to run only this test here. And when I execute this, you're going to notice that something is going to happen in this test folder. So just pay attention to that. So let's go ahead and execute this. And notice that my tests have passed. Okay, the one test that I wrote here has passed. And we have a new folder here called snapshots. All right, so this is what happens when we run the test for the first time. Jest is going to detect that there are no snapshots for this test, so it's going to create that very first snapshot. And this is what it's going to use as a point of reference. So let me go ahead and close this out, and let's have a look at what we have here. So let's go ahead and expand this, and we have here this UI component.test.js.snap. Okay, so this is the snapshot file that we have been talking about. So let's go ahead and open this file and see what we have here. And notice that we have here basically the representation of that object that we passed in, that user object. We can see here our user is called bug squasher, and then we have here their role, which is a tester role. We also have an email here. And lastly, we have here the date that they joined. So this is the information that we passed in. Okay, so this right here, all of this information is basically the snapshot for this particular test. So the next time that we run the test, we already have a snapshot for reference. So we're going to be comparing the output from that test against this snapshot. So if anything varies or anything is different, then our test is going to tell us that. All right, so let me go ahead and execute the test one more time. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here, and I'm just going to push up on my arrow keys and then execute this command here. And notice here that my test is still passing, okay? Nothing has happened, okay? My snapshot is still the same. Okay, this time the test ran. It looked at the snapshot, the new snapshot that got generated against the snapshot that we have on file, which is this one here. And it noticed that there were no differences. They were identical. So my test passed. All right, so now let's have a look at the scenario when this could fail, okay? When can the test fail? Well, it could be that the UI has changed, okay? So that's a perfect example of that. If there are any UI changes, something has changed in the component, the UI component that you're testing, then your test is going to fail. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we're going to make this test fail. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do here is going to go to this UI component. And here I'm free to change whatever I want on here. For example, I could change the name of this class to something else. I could change, for example, this H2 into an H1 or some other heading. I can change this into a div for, whatever reason, whatever thing that I want to change here, I can do that. And that's going to cause my test to fail. So let me go back up here. I'm just going to change the name of this class here. I'm going to say dash test. Okay, so my new class name is called user card dash test. Okay, so this should make my test fail because that's not the class name that is stored in the snapshot. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. And then we're going to execute the test once again. And you can see here right away, the test has failed. It's very quick, by the way. You can see here how quick this test is being executed, and it's less than a second. And we're going to scroll up here just to have a look at what's going on here. We can see what's happening exactly. Right here it says failed, right? Snapshot testing should match user card snapshot. That's the name of my test. And then we can see here what's going on. Okay, so we can see here that we have a class name called user card. That's what we expect. Okay, but we have received user card dash test. So it is very easy to tell why this test has failed. We can see here where the test failed. Okay, when we try to do the actual assertion. All right, so that's a perfect example on how this could fail. All right, now let's have a look at another way in which this could fail. So first, let me go ahead and put this back and make sure that we don't have that anymore. Another way that this could fail is if I go to the actual test and I can change the values for any of these properties here. So instead of this name here, I'm going to call it bug hunter here. And then we're going to go ahead and save this test. And let's go ahead and run it one more time here. We see that the test is still failing, okay? And then we're going to scroll up here and we're going to take a look. Notice that it says right here, the text, right? For the name of the tester, it says bug squasher. That's what we were expecting because that's what the snapshot has. But in our case, when we run the test, we got bug hunter. All right, so very straightforward, very easy to tell why our test is failing. So we can easily go ahead and determine whether it's an issue with the test or if the application or the UI component has changed, then we need to update one or the other. Now we have a couple of options here, right? We could go ahead and undo our change here, but let's say that we want to keep this change and we want to make sure that our test passes going forward. So in this case, we need to update our snapshot, right? Because we want to have this new name in here. Let's go back to the slides for a second to have a look at how we're going to do that. And remember that we said here that we can update the snapshot when the changes are intentional. So in our case, these are intentional changes that we made and we want to keep those changes. So we can use these two flags right here. We can use this long form update snapshot, or we can just say -u, and that's also going to work. So let's go ahead and do that so we can update the snapshot and verify that it's going to be updated and our test is going to pass going forward. And just to make things very clear, let me go ahead and open up this snapshot once again. Notice that the snapshot that we have on file right now, it says bugs squasher. Okay, that's not what we want. So let's go ahead and update this snapshot. Let's bring up a terminal here, and we're going to run a new command here. But this time we're going to go ahead and delete this here. We just want to update our snapshots here. So we're going to say -u, okay? And what this will do is to update this snapshot here with the new information, okay? So let's go ahead and run this here. All right, so we can see here our test suite was executed. In this case, all of our tests were executed. And it says here that one snapshot was updated. Okay, that's the key. That's what we were looking for. All right, so if we go back over here, take a look at the snapshot, we should now see a different name here. So we can see here that the name has indeed changed. All right, and one way that we can verify that this is all working properly is to go back to our test. We see that we have Hunter here. When I run this test now, it should execute with a success. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it now. And we can see here that the test is passing. And that's how simple it is to update snapshots. And by the way, if you guys are just wondering why we have to have this -- right here, and that means that we're going to be executing this command npm test, and that's going to execute our script that I showed earlier, which is this one over here, right? This script called test, and it's basically going to run our Jest test. Okay, it runs this Jest command. And when we say -- here is we're telling npm to ignore whatever comes next. Okay, so the npm command is just test command, and then the information that comes after the -- is going to be passed directly to Jest. Okay, so this is a Jest specific command, just like we did when we did here. We say -u. This is a command that is being passed to Jest, not to npm. And before I end this video, I wanted to point you guys to some additional references that you can use that are very helpful when you're learning about snapshot testing. You can go to this URL here, which is jestjs.io, and then you can go to the documentation section to search for this snapshot testing. And this is very useful because it gives you examples and it gives you a very good detailed information on what snapshot testing is. And one of the things that I did not cover, for example, is this inline snapshots. So basically, this is another way of doing snapshot testing. In our case, we created a snapshot file which was saved outside of our test. But with inline snapshots, you don't do that. You basically store the snapshot within your test file. So this is also a very interesting way of doing snapshot testing. So feel free to browse through this document here to learn more about snapshot testing. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this video series. It's been a pleasure for me to show you guys what snapshot testing is all about. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel.